Imagine a fairy tale in which parents on two separate occasions deliberately lead their own children into a forest, fully aware that they will most likely die of hunger, cold, or be eaten by wolves. A story where they even make sure the children cannot find their way back. A tale in which an ogre, in the middle of the night, kills his own 7 daughters with his own hands. A story where the main character saves his family not through magic or strength, but through cunning, deception, and outright fraud. He tricks a grieving woman and takes all her wealth. And all of this was told to children for centuries. Today we are looking at one of the most brutal fairy tale by Charles Perrault Tom Thumb, French version. What is most striking is that all of this is truly present in the original text, what I said. No modern interpretations, no horror film adaptations, and no creative embellishments. It was all written by Charles Perrault himself in the 17th century, and the folk versions are even older. This is a story about hunger, poverty, and how desperation forces people to cross the boundaries of their unconscious. Subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share this video with your friends. This way you also support the community and help the channel grow. You are watching RobertBooks. Let's begin! So first, we need to forget everything we associate with fairy tales and travel back to France at the end of the 17th century. Today it's difficult to imagine parents voluntarily leaving their children in a forest. It feels impossible, monstrous, and unnatural. But to Perrault contemporaries, this story felt very different. In 1697, when Tom Thumb was published in the collection Tales of Mother Goose, France was going through one of the harshest periods in its history. Europe was in the midst of the so-called Little Ice Age, a prolonged period of cooling that lasted for several centuries. Summers became cold and rainy, winters unusually severe, harvests regularly failed, and famine followed. The early 1619s were especially devastating. Those years were hot and unforgiving. One failed harvest followed another. The price of bread rose so high that for many peasants it became a luxury they could no longer afford. So they grow grain and can afford the bread. My gosh. Historians estimate that the famine of 1693-1694 claimed hundreds of thousands of lives and, by some accounts, more than 1 million people in France. For the country at that time, it was a national catastrophe. This is why the opening scene of the fairy tale does not feel fictional. We see a poor woodcutter and his wife with 7 children. They are not lazy or cruel by nature. They work, but their labor is no longer enough to feed their family. Each day becomes a choice: who gets a piece of bread and who goes hungry. Of course, this does not mean that parents were literally abandoned children in forests on a massive scale. These stories reflect something deeper. The worst fear of peasant families reaching a point where there is not enough food for their own children. The fairy tale takes this fear and stretches it to its extreme, turning it into a dramatic narrative. There is another detail that may seem purely symbolic today, but was very real at that time: wolves. For a modern reader, there are just a fairy tale element. Actually, when I got a small trip early morning in Calgary, I saw a couple. So I know what it's about. In 17th century France, wolves were a genuine threat. Harsh winters and lack of prey drove them closer to villages where they attacked livestock and sometimes even people. So for a child left alone in the forest at night, the danger was not imaginary, it was real. And here the story makes a surprising turn. One might expect the main monster to be the ogre next, yeah? But how the story still passes before he even appears? The first betrayal does not come from monsters. It comes from the parents themselves. And this is why the darkest moment of the tale is not the appearance of the ogre, but much earlier, the evening where the father and mom crying but decide to take their sons into the forest and leave them there alone. Thus, Charles Perrault begins his story not with magical monsters, but with poverty, and it's as if he's telling the reader sometimes true horror is born not from fairy tale creatures, but from hunger, desperation, and circumstances that can break even the most ordinary people. The seven sons and the smallest child. Now that we understand the historical background of the story, it is time to move on the plot itself. So, Charles Perrault begins the tale very calmly, without any magic or fairy tale wonders. We are introduced to an ordinary peasant family. A woodcutter and his wife had seven sons, all of them boys. The eldest was only 10 years old and the youngest was 7. That's interesting. So she born like 2, 3 each year. Even this first sentence is striking, not because there are many children, but because of how small they are. The eldest is only 10, the youngest is 7. It means the children were born almost one after another. Children factory, my gosh. And 7 very young boys are growing up in the same household, all completely depend on their parents. Today this may seem unusual, but in the 17th century such families were not rare. Child mortality was extremely high, so families often tried to have many children, knowing that not all of them would survive into adulthood. So, however, large families had a harsh downside. During times of famine, it became almost impossible to feed everyone. Then Perrault introduces the main character. The youngest was very small, and when he was born, he was no bigger than a thumb. So she born Poop. This is where his nickname comes from, Tom Thumb. Interestingly, the author immediately breaks the usual fairy tale image. This is not a magical child with supernatural powers. His only unusual trait is his size. He cannot fly, he has no magic, no fairy helps him. He is simply extremely small. But this physical trait becomes the reason others underestimate him. Perrault adds another important detail. He hardly spoke, and therefore everyone thought he was stupid. This is one of the most interesting moments in the tale. Nobody actually checks whether the boy is truly foolish. Nobody tries to understand why he is silent. People simply draw the easiest conclusion. If he doesn't speak, he must not understand. If he is small, he must be weak. If he is quiet, he must be useless. Here Perrault begins to play with the reader's expectations. In many fairy tales, the hero is strong, brave, or beautiful prince from the start. Here it is the opposite. The hero is the smallest, the quietest, the most unnoticed, and therefore are constantly underestimated. But then the author adds a sentence that changes everything. In fact, he was the cleverest of all the brothers and listened more than he spoke. Just one sentence, but it becomes the key to the entire story. While the others act im- impulsively, im- impulsively, cry, panic, or rely on adults. Tom Thumb observes, he listens and remembers, and then he acts. It's contrasting two types of people: those who talk a lot but notice a little, and those who speak little but observe everything carefully. And it's the second type that survives. There is also another detail. Why exactly seven brothers? The number seven constantly appears in the European folklore. Seven brothers, seven daughters of the ogre, seven league boots. In Christian tradition, seven represents completeness. 7 days of creation, seven rituals, seven deadly sins. In folk culture, it became a symbolic number, which is why Perrault repeats it throughout the story. But the main point is not the number, it's the contrast. Among seven ordinary boys, the most capable one is the one everyone considered the most useless. From the very beginning, Perrault seems to warn the reader: never judge a person by appearance, age, or how much they speak. And very soon the characters will have to learn this themselves, because that very night Tom Thumb accidentally overhears a conversation that will change the fate of the entire family. The overheard conversation of the parents. Night. The woodcutter's house. 7 children are sleeping in one room. In another room, the parents. And Perrault doesn't begin with horror, he begins with the conversation. What shall we do? This is not panic, not hysteria. It's the quiet, exhausted voice of people who have not slept because of hunger for a long time. And importantly, they are not discussing whether the children will die, they are discussing how it will happen. That is the first psychological crack. The parents are already inside the decision. They are simply trying to justify it, why they cry and why it does not save anything. The text mentions tears. Yeah, they are crying, and here modern readers often misunderstand. It seems that tears equal goodness, but in Perrault's world it's different. Tears are not a stop. Tears are part of the process. They do not interrupt the decision, they accompany it. This is the brutal moment. Emotion no longer cancels action. We cannot feed them. This is the key line. Not we don't want it or we are afraid, but a dry, almost practical statement: we cannot. There is no cruelty in the traditional sense here. There is something worse: economic inevitability. Hunger in this story is not a background, it's like a law of physics. And the parents are inside that law. Why they do not tell the children the truth? This is one of the darkest choices of the scene. They decide not to explain. Why? Because the truth turns them into monsters. Saying it directly would already be a mud in words before the act itself. So they choose another path, silent, leading into the forest. They do not want to be killers in their own eyes, but whether they want to avoid killing is no longer the question. Why? This is the worst the ogre. The ogre will later kill children in this story, but the parents have already made a decision. Leads to the same outcome. The difference is that they do it not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. And Perrault holds up a mirror. The monster has not yet appeared, but morality has already collapsed inside the house. When the conversation ends, there is no resolution, only quiet silence. No shooting, no conflict, no resistance, just a decision made by people who will still count themselves parents in the morning. Stones. The first scene where the child thinks against the adult world. While white stones, actually, at first glance just a detail, in reality a key symbol. White stones in the dark forest are not just a navigation tool, they represent contrast. White color, white, it's order, memory, a trace. Forest, it's a chaos, erasure, disappearance. The child instinctively does something crucial. He tries to impose order where it no longer exists. There is not just cleverness, it's an attempt to maintain control over a collapsing reality. Why at night actually, it's same, not decorative here. The parents make their decision at night. They prepare the betrayal at night and the child responds in the same darkness. This creates a rhythm. Adults decide in darkness and child responds in the same darkness. But there is a difference. The adults use night to hide moral action. The child uses it so as not to be blind. And here we are no longer talking about plot. We are talking about clash of two types of consciousness. And here appears the central psychological point of the scene. Tom Thumb is not the strongest, not the oldest, not one of the brothers respects, but he is the one who understands what's going on. This breaks the usual fairy tale logic. In most stories, older ones lead, strong ones protect, adults decide. Here's the reverse. Adults are the source of danger, and therefore the smallest becomes the only one capable of strategic thinking. It's important not to romanticize him as a genius. He's not smart by nature, he's simply the only one who cannot afford trust. The older brothers still live in the illusion of normality. They still assume that adults mean protection. But he has already understood the key truth. In this situation, protection has become the source of danger. And that makes his thinking not smart but necessary. When he drops the stones, it looks almost innocent, but in reality, something else is happening. For the first time, the child becomes the one who thinks for a world that is no longer reliable. And from this moment, the story is no longer about poverty, it becomes a story about how intelligence is born where trust is no longer possible. Second, betrayal, the coldest turn of the tale. So children back, thanks Tom Thumb. And if in the first attempt there was at least some internal fracture, here it is gone. It's important shift. Before they acted under the pressure of hunger, now they act with preparation. I'm talking about parents. This is no longer reaction, it's a plan. They lock Tom Thumb in so he cannot collect the pebbles, and this is the key moment of the scene because the logic of action changes. Before, they simply take the children into the forest, and now they're controlling the mechanism of survival itself. There is no longer just abandonment, it's the active removal of any chance of survival. The first betrayal can still be explained by weakness, it can be rationalized. They didn't know what they were doing, but the second betrayal destroys that possibly completely. Because now it's the understanding that he can return, the understanding of how he would do it, and the decision to prevent it. This is no longer blindness, it's a conscious act against their own child. In the forest, the children stumble upon the ogre's house. Actually, why the ogre's house doesn't look like a monster lair, yeah? In a typical fairy tale logic. We expect darkness, filth, horror, obvious signs of evil, but Perrault doesn't do this. The house looks almost normal, typical. And this is an important device, because the fear is not external, it's the embedded in everyday normality itself. The ogre's wife, the first moral paradox, and here appears one of the most unexpected characters in the story, the ogre's wife. She breaks the simple scheme. At first glance, house evil, master evil, therefore everything inside evil, but no. She behaves differently. She warns the boys several times. She doesn't shout, doesn't accuse them, doesn't immediately turn them in. She tries to redirect their behavior, hide them, feed them, delay their encounter with her husband. And this is important. She doesn't remove the danger, but she tries to soften it. Children are also something else. They are told an ogre lives here, and they still think, really? Let's live here then. Good idea. Apparently, they were more afraid of wolves. And here a paradox emerges. The parents, alive, familiar, and normal, yet decide to abandon their children. The ogre's wife inside the monstrous house next to real danger, yet tries to save children. And that tale seems to deliberately invert moral hierarchy. The ogre returns home, absolutely, master came back, and at first nothing happens. He doesn't immediately turn violent, he behaves calmly. And this creates tension, because evil here does not explode, it operates. The night scene, caps and crowns. Finally, he found the children, so his wife begs him to postpone his cannibalistic feast until tomorrow, and the children are left to sleep with the ogre's daughters. Only the boys wear caps, while the daughters wear crowns. And here's the interesting part: at night, Tom Thumb swaps them. He puts the crowns on his brothers and the caps on the ogre's daughters. And now a question rises. Tom Thumb, why not you locked up by your parents? How did you even get out? Genius. The ogre enters at night. He doesn't look, he doesn't recognize, he relies on symbols. What can be seen in the dark, surely. And it's a key point. In darkness, intelligence is replaced by perception, and perception fails. At the moment of selection, the worst happens. The ogre does not hesitate, he simply acts according to a mistaken logic. And here it's important, he doesn't choose incorrectly, he doesn't even realize he's choosing it all. The death of 7 daughters is not described emotionally in the moment. This is intentional. Perrault removes screaming resistance dialogue, only action remains. And that makes it all heavier. The 7 league boots. Morning, realization, and pursuit begins. The ogre wakes up. At first everything feels wrong when he came to the room. The children are lying there, but something is off. And only a second later comes understanding. It's not an immediate explosion of rage, it's a slow recognition of catastrophe. And this is the break happens. He realizes he has killed his own daughters. This is the key psychological bit of the tale, because for the first time he's not a hunter, not a predator, not an external monster. He's a mistake inside his own system of actions. Rage, pursuit, only after realization comes reaction. Rage, anger, the desire to undo what cannot be undone, but it's already impossible. Only pursuit remains, and here appears the famous 7 league boots. Actually, why boots? Boots are not a random object. They are a tool of movement, not destruction tied to the earth. not flight or magic escape. They make violence fast, mechanical, inevitable. This is not a magic for beauty, it's acceleration of pursuit. Why 7 league? 7 league is not a precise measurement, but symbolic idea of hyper movement. Like we previously said, 7 it's symbolic number. So together, one step equals an entire world of distance. What this does to the story? Before the boots, you can hide, you can delay, you can buy time. After the boots, time no longer protects you. Pursuit becomes mathematically inevitable. Sometimes the ogre has to sit and rest. So now I've got ready a couple of questions. Well, first of all, if it's 7 miles boots uh, at ogre, how fast should be children that they all the time upfront him, even if he got such boots? Another thing, uh, how far, like generally how long the distance they should pass, cause ogre is tired, he need a rest. Really? That's contradiction. They symbolize extreme speed, yet exhaustion still exists. So power is not absolute, it's still human, like in limitation. The chase and the stone, the children hide behind the other side of the stone. The ogre stops Norby, and here the first real manipulation appears. Why Tom Thumb doesn't just keep running, he understands something crucial. The ogre has resources, boots, but no patience. He is fast, but not stable. He chases impulsively, not systematically, so he can be broken by time. After the ogre falls asleep near the stone, Tom Thumb makes his key move. He takes the 7 league boots, and this is important. It's not just escaping faster. He's taking control of the instrument of power itself. Before, power belonged to the ogre. After, it belongs to the child. Then comes an episode often overlooked. Tom Thumb goes to the ogre's wife and lies to her. He tells her the ogre has been captured by bandits, that he's in trouble, and the boots are needed for delivering ransom money quickly. This is no longer simple survival, it's a social manipulation. He uses trust, he uses fear, he uses authority of the absent husband, and most important, he turns strategy into financial transaction. What this does into the hero, and he becomes uncomfortable because Tom Thumb is no longer just surviving or protecting his brothers. He is extracting benefit from the situation. He acts as strategist, deceiver, intermediary of catastrophe. And when he leaves with money and boots, it does not look like a heroic victory. It looks like a quiet chain: poverty, betrayal, fear, death, cunning, profit. That's it. And the story states a harsh idea. Survival is not always noble. Sometimes it's purely transactional. And honestly, what hits hardest in this, personally for me, in the end, Tom Thumb returns home with wealth to the very parents who twice tried to abandon him to death. And they welcome him with joy and relief, of course, with the money, absolutely. Maybe he is clever, but unresolved trauma and the strange attachment to abusive relationships seem to be doing their job too. Other versions of the fairy tale. How one story changed across countries. In Germany, Brothers Grimm version, the plot is softer and more refined. There is more emphasis on trials and tests, less social harshness toward to the parents, and the ending often shifts toward reward and the restoration of order. The meaning shifts from cold calculation to a moral trial and reward from cleverness. In England version, actually Tom Thumb original, yeah, the story moves toward a miniature fantasy hero. The hero is simply born tiny. There are more adventures than horror, and the focus is on wonder rather than hunger. The survival fear turns into an entertaining fairy tale miniature. In the Russian tradition, especially in Afanasyev's collection, a darker logic is often preserved. Poverty remains a constant background. The forest and the foreign world are dangerous, and the child's cleverness becomes the main tool of survival. The meaning here is that the world is dangerous by nature and the child is forced to become an adult too early. In Ukrainian versions, the emphasis shifts toward collective survival. The family is treated as a group, mutual support is central, and there is less focus on the lone clever hero. Instead of the smart child, it becomes a collective survival strategy. In Jewish folk versions, intelligence is often framed as the survival tool of the weak. The vulnerability of the family, the need for intellect against brute force, and cunning as a protection against external pressure. The core idea is that intelligence is the only defense of the weak against a stronger world. And we got even Japanese variation or similar archetypal interpretations. There is usually less violence, more symbolism, and a stronger focus on the consequences of actions. The shift is from horror and hunger toward the moral lessons about consequences. If we simplify everything, we get a map of meaning. So France Perrault version is represents survival through cold intelligence. Germany Grimm represents morality and trials. England represents magical adventure. Russia, it's harsh reality and early adulthood. Ukraine, collective survival. Jewish tradition represents the intelligence of the weak against power. And Japan, its moral symbolism and consequences. When you read Tom Thumb as an adult, it becomes clear that this is not a story about the weak defeating the strong. It's the story about how survival gradually erodes morality until almost nothing is left on it. The ogre is not the main horror. The real horror is how easily a world shaped by hunger and fear stops distinguishing between what is right and what is merely necessary. And perhaps that is exactly why this tale has survived for countries and centuries. It doesn't comfort the reader. It confronts them with the uncomfortable truth that sometimes victory is only a form of survival, not goodness. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe this channel. See you next time. Goodbye.